So now we'll look at the biggest line, probably, as far as the theory is concerned, the line with maybe the greatest number of variations we need to remember. And it's called the Austrian Attack. As I told you some chapters ago, some names of the variations are well known, and some I make up as I go, basically. But I think the Austrian Attack, I'm pretty sure about this. Yeah, F4 is called the Austrian Attack. The life of me, I do not know why. There is probably some reasoning behind it. It could be sophisticated, could be not, but I just don't know why. Maybe you could sort of investigate this. But I know it's called the Austrian Attack, and it leads to very sharp play and very, really interesting variations. So we're going to have a lot of fun, me and you, looking at this together. So F4, okay, we play bishop G7. And basically, the Austrian Attack is characterized by, these 3 pawns in the center. And all that it entails, right? White is very central, very active, but sometimes overextended. All this space comes with a responsibility, with a necessity to protect it. And this has implications, right, for the whole battle to come. White will be active, but white will be overextended most of the time, and black will be counterattacking from a very safe sort of base, if I may. But okay, more on the ideas later as we just proceed with the lines. I think it's easier. For now, let's just look at what moves are possible here so that we know what kind of work expects us. So the main move here is knight f3. And the deviations, bishop d3 is a pretty good move. Deserves some attention. Bishop d3 has some sort of a sophisticated point that we will discuss together, and some slightly weaker moves. Yeah, I think e5 here is well known, but it's a bit early, and white is not yet ready for this, not yet fully ready for this. And there is another move which is related to bishop d3 a bit in its main idea, but it's also not great. Is the move a3. So let's start from the weaker moves. e5 basically comes early. White is not yet ready to defend this pawn triangle. Black just plays knight fd7 and gets ready to play c5. Gets ready to play c5 to attack the pawns. And black has infinite amount of resources to throw against the white center, and white has no normal way to defend this. Yeah, so we will keep on encountering this theme. White cannot actually protect the pawn center, and white needs some tricks. And at the moment, there are no tricks, just too early for that. White is not developed enough for this. So bishop c4 looks a bit tempting because, this pawn is, you could consider it weak, but after c5, turns out to be an illusion. White does not actually have any tactics. e6 takes, just white loses a pawn and doesn't get anything for it, right? Black takes on d4 next, or after d takes c5, black can go d5 or take on c5. White just doesn't have anything for the pawn, and this is not the way white should play. And knight f3 here is better, and after c5 we enter a different line. So I will not spend time on it here. It just transposes to a line we will cover later. That line is when white plays knight f3 first, c5, and then e5, knight fd7. So we'll get to this position. Black has no reasons to fear it. We just cannot cover it in two places, right? So just check it out there. And then there is this move a3. Turned out I have already quite forgotten this because, first I wrote down the commentary in the text form, and then now I'm making those videos. So sometimes I'm surprised myself to find out what I wrote about some move in the PGNs. Apparently about a3, I wrote that, this little move does not deserve the popularity it enjoyed the last few years, and reminded me of a scene from that movie Alita, the Battle Angel. I don't know if you know it, but quite a movie. So if you want to have some fun watching something, not very demanding, so to speak, just a lot of fun. And at some point, Alita tells someone, "You do not deserve such a weapon." Yeah, so I remember this. Yeah, it doesn't deserve the popularity that it has, this move. The idea behind a3 is to prevent c5. Basically, it's like this, right? So now let's try to understand this, because a3 just looks pointless. So the idea is like this. Very often black in these positions plays c5 in order to play queen a5 after d takes c5 to attack this pawn. We have encountered this elsewhere. We know this, this line. So a3 is supposed to prevent this. And black castles, knight f3, there is some theory here. And, white invested the move a3, but prevented c5. And, a lot of really good players have played this way with white. The problem about this approach is that it does not prevent c5. Black can go this anyway. D takes c5. And now black has at least two good lines. First of all, black can go queen a5, threatening this pawn with disastrous consequences for white. White goes b4, what else, right? I mean, this was exactly the point. And after queen d8, once again, this pawn is hanging. This pawn is also hanging. This diagonal is vulnerable. The knight on c3 is vulnerable. And white is actually dangerously overextended. This line is not new. It's known by now, but it's a good way for black to play. But this is not even all there is to it. So knight bd7 is I think, a novelty, or at least a reasonably new idea by now. It's very strong. Black is just threatening to take on c5, and after takes, it turns out white is actually already in some trouble. Black is threatening rook e8. It's very easy for black to, to just attack this pawn on e4 a few times and win it back. But also queen b6 will prevent the king from castling. So white is actually in a lot of trouble now, and might as well, try to make the most of it. Queen takes d6. White is now 2 pawns up. Rook e8, and now black actually has, this threat, but also this threat, because the queen is actually also in trouble. And white gets basically in all kinds of trouble, right? After bishop d3, for instance, a6. And now if white castles, this just traps the queen. So this queen is in a lot of trouble. And if white doesn't castle, then, black can just proceed b5, bishop b7. White is in a bad shape here. After knight e5, somehow trying to stay alive. Rook e6 is, very direct. I analyze these positions a bit, and white is just sort of barely staying alive with the king on e1. And the most sort of important trick is that after e5, we can actually just take on e5. It's a very pretty sighty, because you don't see this trick very often, but white actually has a lot of things hanging. And the most important thing is that knight f3 comes with a double check. And, white is struggling to stay alive in this line. So basically, this line with a3 is just not great for many reasons, especially because, after c5, dc, we have two ways to get a good position. Queen a5, which is well known, and knight bd7, which is entirely new. So now, when you encounter a3, you can think about it, right? This move does not deserve the popularity that it enjoys. And you can think of, Alita the Battle Angel. You do not deserve such a weapon. But okay, let's move on, because I can talk about movies all day long, but we're not exactly here for that. We are trying to learn something about this opening. A3 we covered, so bishop d3 is a better move. The idea is the same. The idea is actually sort of smart. Since black's plan is c5 and queen a5, white preemptively defends the e4 pawn and takes c5 more or less out of the picture. We do not want to, basically we never ever want to take back on c5 with a pawn. Yeah, this would allow white to go e5, get a very strong position in the center, and we would have weaknesses left. So basically, look at the structure. What we want is to exchange. We want to exchange these two pawns. We want them gone, and then we will play the resulting structure. We do not want the d6 pawn to move to c5. Yeah, this is something that is important for our understanding of this line. So after bishop d3, since c5 now doesn't work, the e4 pawn is protected. We play e5, a very central approach, both good in its own way, but also good to prevent e5 from white. And now, basically, the idea, white can of course play knight f3, but this is not the idea. After takes c6, what actually has some troubles with this knight, because queen b6 is annoying, knight g4 is annoying after bishop e3. White has some troubles castling here. So this is not the way to play, not the idea behind this line. And the idea is actually to take d takes e5, d takes e5, and now we see that we were able to play e5 because the bishop on d3 blocks this file. Happens every now and then in our opening, right? That the bishop d3 can be detrimental for white once the d file opens. And here, okay, white can go for the ending. Bishop b5. Okay, we can also do other things, but the simplest is c6, takes. There is no reason for black to fear this. It just, black is really well developed, and we'll follow up with knight bd7, king e7, and after f takes e5, we can always win back this pawn and get a great knight on e5. So knight f3, knight bd7, castles, king e7. Sooner or later, white will probably take on e5, and black will win this pawn back. So there are no worries here. This is also not a crucial variation, so that's why we cover it in a reasonably speedy fashion. Knight f3 is better. Some good players have been here. This is a line to be treated with respect. So it's difficult for us to protect this pawn forever. So more natural, maybe simpler, to just take on f4, bishop f4, castle short. And basically now you would be justified in asking, why does white play this line, right? The e4 pawn is weak, potentially, and the square in front of it is weak. One day, black will get to this square. What white has going for them is the development, right? White has developed many pieces very quickly and still has a chance to castle long to get a sharp fight where the development will probably matter. So this explains the next move, queen d2. White actually needs to castle long for the setup to make sense. And now black has a few options. I quite like bishop g4 because now, we have this emergency breaks. We can always take on f3 if we need to, exchange some pieces to reduce white's chances to develop the initiative. Castles long and c6. This will no longer surprise you. We've seen this motif so often now. The knight on c3 is dominated by the pawn on c6. And also here, a bit of an extra bonus, the queen gets a chance to be deployed actively, right? b6, a5, so c6. As usual, it's a very good positional device. And h3 is normal. At some point, white will have to do this, right? Takes queen a5. And basically, yeah, white has two bishops. We reach this position, I wouldn't say by force, but from a very sort of logical sequence. Very likely you will reach this position if your opponent plays this line with bishop d3. And basically, black has this plan knight bd7, knight h5. All black pieces are pretty active. Of course, white has the bishops. But white also has problems, like these pawns, make them red. These pawns, they have the potential to be weak in an ending. So imagine the world where, the dark squared bishops are traded and the queens are maybe traded, and then the black knights will get to the squares like e5 and maybe h5, f4. So white has to tread carefully. This pawn structure is likely to leave some weaknesses behind. So this is bishop d3. You don't see this line every day. It has been played a few times in sort of top grandmaster practice, but it's good to know. Yeah, I think this is enough of a direction for you so that we can move on. This was this move, a sophisticated move, bishop d3, defending the e4 pawn. Once again, to prevent the move c5. Yeah, so we were we felt the necessity to change the plan and go for e5 instead. Sort of logical in a way, right? Why did not go knight f3, so we get to play e5. And so we covered e5, we covered a3, we looked at bishop d3, and now the main move, knight f3. And here black has many very different systems. The most central of them, the most ambitious and probably the most principled is the one we're going for. This is this line with c5. This position leads to some of the most fascinating theory you will ever encounter in chess. It's just one of those lines where it's also just so historically important because there were so many games with beautiful novelties just to make this playable. So in due time, of course, I will tell you all about it. But for now, yeah, c5, this position is one of the most sort of, I think, important positions in history of our game as far as the opening theory is concerned. Yeah, there is a lot of great development here over the last few decades. So now let's take sort of an overview of what's possible here. The main move here is bishop b5 check. And we will cover this after we're done with all the deviations. The deviations will include, well, e5, which is, a bit early. White is not really ready for this. d5, sort of closing down the center, making it a bit of Benoni structure, but the favorable one for black. We have some very nice ideas here. And d takes c5, just taking the pawn and asking black to show the plan. Yeah, so we'll do this 3 first, and we'll cover the bishop b5 check separately, so as not to sort of overburden one chapter with so many lines. So the 3 moves we have to cover. Let's start by e5. This is always very tempting. White, pushes the pawn forward and creates a pawn triangle that blocks the bishop. But the problem is that these pawns can also become vulnerable, and they often are, as they are in this case. Play knight of d7, and these pawns are already under attack, and it's difficult to see what white could possibly get from advancing the pawns so early. These pawns can be strong if they can, block off this bishop, but for now, white is more concerned about, keeping these pawns alive. C takes d4 is already a threat. White has, principally 3 ways to deal with this. Try to take on c5, try to take on d6, or try to go e6. And neither of these moves is particularly great. So let's start by e takes d6, castle, and bishop e3. This is probably the safest move, keeping the e-file temporarily closed and defending the pawn on d4. Both these things are very important. E takes d6, queen d2. This is basically not amazing for white, but at least it's decently playable. Knight c6, castle's long. So basically white manages to get the king out of the danger from e1 to c1. It's much better on c1, and sort of you made it out of the dangerous pin. Black plays something like queen a5, and well, it is a complicated position, but I think black has come out of the opening in a very good shape. White has this long-term problem of the pawn on f4 and the bishop on e3 that this pawn blocks, and potentially black might get very good grip on the light squares by playing knight f6 and bishop f5. It's a decent way to play with white, but not promising in any way. D takes c5 is not better. Just take on e5, takes, and knight c6. This pawn is obviously not going to survive for very long, and white can damage black's structure at the cost of this pawn, but then black will castle and will try to win the pawn on c5, and white will probably have to play very well to keep the balance here. So this is maybe the worst of white's options. And coming back to move 7, e6 has been played by some good players, but I don't actually get the appeal. White threatens the pawn on e6, but it's not difficult to defend this, and white wins the pawn back, but it's unclear what white actually gets out of this opening. Takes is normal, and now white has this strange looking pawn on f4 blocking the bishop once again. The knight on g5 not doing anything really, and black threatens queen b6 to make sure that the king remains in the center, and white has a lot of problems to solve in this position. So drawing some first conclusions, maybe e takes d6 is the best of white's options, but essentially e5 is just not a great move in this position. White creates a vulnerability in the center way too early, and there are simply better ways to play this opening. So we can discard e5 and look at d5. It's a popular continuation, especially, white is not prepared, and then, white probably will not challenge you in any theoretical debates, and d5 looks like white will close the position, and at least nothing bad will happen. Castles, okay, first castle, ask questions later is a strategy most of the time, and now white basically has a choice where to develop this bishop, right? So ideally bishop d3, castles long, but bishop e2 also has some sort of a point. So we can start by looking at bishop e2. e6 is very natural, undermining the pawns immediately. And basically, if we are, able to take rook e, this is always good for black, because essentially the pawn on f4 has no point there, right? It blocks the bishop on c1, and compared to normal Benoni's, white is just weak in the center. This is the double-edged nature of the whole of the Austrian attack. The pawn appears on f4, and white needs to justify it somehow. And if it doesn't get white anyway, it just becomes a weakness, a liability in the long run. So white needs to do something. D takes e6 is one way of doing this. Bishop e6. So now it would be normal to castle short, knight c6, but this actually gives black a very nice position. Black has a lot of natural plans. d5 is one. Queen b6 followed by knight d4 is another. Black can also go queen b6 followed by rook a d8. Like, it's just very, very active here and nicely developed. So this is at least not problematic for black at all. Knight g5 could be seen as ambitious. At least, white tries to get a bishop pair, make it green. Knight c6 takes. Okay, white got the bishops, but after castles, queen e7, black actually is the one with the very strong position in the center. And after rook a d8, followed by d5, these pawns, they will start rolling. The king at some point will probably go to h8 to be just extra comfortable, although on g8 it's not under a lot of pressure either. And in general, I find this sort of positions where the two bishops are facing a stronger center. These positions are always difficult for the bishops. The bishops do not do well against a fortified central position, and I personally also would prefer to play with the black pieces here. At least this is sort of the feeling that I have. As in some other lines, you can also see here the rook on f8 develops without doing anything for it, essentially by taking knight e6, white develops the rook. So this is not at all a problematic line for black. This line being bishop e2. Bishop e2, you could say is maybe a passive square, and you could ask why wouldn't white automatically develop the bishop to a more active square. The bishop is traditionally a bit better on d3 in these lines because it covers the pawn on e4. But with the bishop on d3, we have a very surprising, a very new way of playing that is actually very daring, very unusual. We just start by sacrificing one pawn, and white will take it, of course, and then we sacrifice another one. One doesn't see it very often, but this is a very strategically sound way of playing, justified by the fact that white's position is weakened and the king is still on e1. So we're actually fighting for the initiative and fighting against the white's center. So in order to understand why this makes sense, we need to look at some lines. So first off, bishop takes b5 is plain bad because we can take knight takes e4, and then we pick up this bishop on b5. White's king gets stuck in the center, and black is left with two bishops. So this we can just ignore. This is just bad for white. Knight takes b5 is better. Knight takes e4. And now you can already see some outlines of why this will be a strong compensation, right? This bishop is powerful. The diagonal is open. This pawn is is a liability on f4. In fact, if you could move this pawn back to f2, this pawn would consolidate white's position, and there would be no serious compensation. And the king is vulnerable on e1. So let's see how it works in some lines. So for instance, castles here, queen b6, knight bd4, knight f6. This is actually maybe slightly unusual to move the knight back, but we're actually just trying to win this pawn on d5. And essentially, white cannot really keep this pawn alive in the long run. We just, attack it a few times. And once this pawn falls, black will be better because, we're just strong in the center, right? We'll have central pawns against some side pawns and a very strong position. So this is just one line. The other line is queen e2. Which is natural, right? You attack the knight and you prepare bishop e3 against any queen b6. So it's a natural way to play, but it's actually, it's a tactical blunder of sorts. It's after queen a5, c3. Black has knight takes c3. It's not a difficult tactic, right? Black basically wins material because the white rook is hanging on a1, and it's a bit surprising because I think this is a novelty, and or at least it was a novelty when I was looking at this. It's a bit surprising that it was not discovered before. Maybe queen d2 looked like a possible pin, but black will definitely have a lot of ways to get out of this pin, like maybe queen b4. White has way too many tactical problems to come out of this alive. So this just doesn't really work for white. And these are basically two unfortunate ways to take the pawn on b5. Bishop d3 is better, trying to keep things under control. White sort of took the pawn, got back to the defensive position and defended the potential weakness on e4. The thing is, as long as the white king is on e1, black is the one with the persistent initiative. So we go b4. We have to continue creating threats. Knight e2 is normal, right? Where else would you place this knight? And now queen b6. We make sure that the king remains in the center. And black is ready to follow up very naturally, attacking this pawn. Black's compensation is not even difficult to play. knight g3 is logical. White prepares queen e2, bishop e3, castle short. Bring the knight to c5, queen e2, following with the plan, knight c5. And now it's just difficult for white to move anything because, well, castling is still not possible, right? Because we just take material. And it's difficult to think of a more, sensible move than bishop e3. But then after knight g4, everything is hanging in white's position. So this bishop is hanging, this bishop is hanging, the pawn on b2 is hanging. And it seems to me white will not come out of this alive, especially because there is this tactic with bishop d4. This bishop d4 move just doesn't work because black can take, and take. It's a slightly complicated tactic, but once you know it, it just works amazingly. Black attacks the queen and the knight will basically fall the next move. And black will have an amazing position because even after the end of this combination, white has a lot of weaknesses left. So basically this line just does not really work great for white, which is great news for black, right? For us. So let's just go back. This was the line where white made very sensible moves, played bishop d3, then took the pawn, then went back to defend the central pawn and still got into trouble. This is the power of the initiative in chess and the power of concrete opening analysis. Sometimes you can definitely get into trouble in chess without doing anything so very wrong. Of course, some of your moves will be mistakes if you got into trouble, but they will be sometimes mistakes which are very difficult to point out. Yeah, and that's why we have to prepare our lines and analyze things in detail because, well, chess can be a difficult game at times. So this is the story of bishop d3, and this basically concludes our study of this move d5. So now we looked at e5 here, wasn't great. We looked at d5, was not amazing. And now we should look at d takes c5, which is a move with more depth and more historical tradition. There are quite some relevant games that have been played here by some very good players. After d takes c5, our move is queen a5. There is nothing else. We do need this move. This move is the very reason why this line exists at all. We need to attack the pawn and the other pawn, and the other pawn is even more important. Knight takes e4 is a serious threat, and something white cannot allow. This would sort of create a lot of vulnerability in white's position. So knight takes e4 is a threat to be taken very seriously, which is why we, usually can pick up this pawn on c5 in peace. So now white has a lot of moves. But basically all of them are somehow connected to the e4 pawn. So most moves that somehow defend the pawn have been tried again and again and again. So let's just go through them. This move is not a great one, but it does prevent knight takes e4. So one of the moves that have been played. Queen e2 is another. Queen d3. Basically all the different ways to defend the e4 pawn. Bishop b5 check, another move which is not too great. Just postponing the problem more than anything else. And the most popular, bishop d3, just sort of defending this pawn directly. There is also a slightly weird looking queen d4. One of these moves that, looks strange in the beginning, and when you start looking at it, it continues looking strange. Yeah, so never becomes anything natural. So these are white choices. I see a lot of arrows, but yeah, a lot of these moves, they are either easily discarded, or they are not really great, or they transpose into each other. So in reality, it's all much more compact than it looks right now. So, well, let's get going. Yes, let's begin with a most natural response, bishop d3. The natural response doesn't mean it's the strongest one, but it usually means it's the one that you're most likely to get. At least when I was a kid, bishop d3 was sort of automatic, was played in a number of high quality games, and when I was playing the Peers in my early days, I didn't even know, honestly, that other moves exist. So bishop d3 is the one that, the default move, more or less. That's what I would probably play on a Sunday morning if I, encountered this with white. So bishop d3, we take with the queen. Always take with the queen, never with the pawn, is the motto for this variation. And now, importantly, the queen on c5 prevents white from castling short, which means white needs to do something about it. And basically, the only thing really white can do about this is to prepare bishop e3. And this explains the next move. White plays queen e2, preparing bishop e3, and then deciding, where to castle. So we castle. There's no need to look for anything else. Castling is perfectly safe and flexible, right? We don't know yet where we will develop the rest of our pieces, so we castle first. Bishop e3, already, indicated by the previous move, the only move that makes sense now. And we go queen a5. It's a safe square, and also black queen tries to stay reasonably active. We don't want to go to c7 for no reason, right? So queen on a5 is safe. And now basically white should castle short with the next move. Castling long, well, it's just not really safe, right? With the black queen on a5 and everything. And castling short is safer in general in most positions in this opening. Sometimes people play h3 to control this square, to prevent bishop g4. The reality is white doesn't really have time for this. And black can play b5, which is basically a refutation of white's last move. Black is threatening b4, which is a very unpleasant threat, kicking the white pieces back. And after bishop b5, this pawn will be hanging with basically decisive threats. So the h3 is not a good move. You don't even basically have to know this, but if you do know this, just knowing one move b5 is enough. And usually white castles instead, much better move, much safer. And our move here is bishop g4. So now that the white king is castled, h3 is something of a positional threat. Because it's difficult, once white plays h3, to develop the c8 bishop actively. And this is a common problem in a lot of openings, also here. Okay, we could, play bishop d7, but it's not a very active square, right? So bishop g4 solves this bishop problem once and for all. And essentially, we are ready to take on f3. And there is an interesting strategic background to our readiness to abandon this bishop, as in so many other lines in the Peerts. This reason is that well, the other bishop is actually controlling a lot of dark squares. So the bishop is very strong on this diagonal. And now especially the d4 pawn is gone in this line, so this diagonal will basically stay open. And we do not need any other piece to cover the light squares. Yeah, you'll see at the end of this line, we basically have the plan for the light squares as well. Black is very harmoniously placed, but just bear with me, and just a little patience is all I'm asking for, and we'll see why Black will be able to control squares of both colors. So now White has two moves. They're not very different. Queen e1 is sort of a slightly more sophisticated way of doing this, but we just take here anyway. And yeah, White will, of course, take with the rook. Knight c6. Say king h1, which is usually a useful move anyway, especially since knight g4 is a threat. White prepares the safe spot for the bishop after knight g4. And here we can do a lot of things, but we can also just play d5, sort of forcing the opening of the center and the opening of this diagonal, or the further opening of this diagonal. And now White basically either has to take, after which the diagonal will open and we just get really easy play, or White plays e5 d4, after which too we get the piece back and a very easy play as well. So this is a useful device. It's not necessary to go d5. You could just develop your pieces, but it's nice. Yeah, why not? So this is queen e1, and normally, of course, people play h3. For all our development and the sophistication and the engines and databases and whatnot, most of the time people still make the most natural move most of the time. And well, it's good to know, right? I mean, no matter what the computer tells you, there are some moves which people are more likely to make than others. h3 is one of those moves. Takes. Queen takes. It's a bit unnatural to take with the rook, right? I mean, taking with the rook would leave the rook oddly placed on f3. So yeah, queen f3 is much more natural. Knight c6. The knight in general is very well placed here. Make it green. And the square is left free because sometimes the other knight will go there. So in this position, White has a lot of moves, but normally White plays a3 because Black has some sort of ideas. For instance, knight b4 is a threat potentially. Getting the bishop, or queen b4 sometimes can be an idea. So a3 in general is considered a useful move, an almost automatic reflex for many players. Just playing it safe. And I will play knight d7. So this is a setup which I think is very harmonious. I don't know if we are actually threatening to take on c3, maybe. But on the other hand, this bishop is a valuable piece. Yeah, I'm not sure simply if this pawn would be worth it. But on the other hand, we also do not need to. In general, Black has a very safe, very playable position. where we control a lot of valuable squares, a lot of important squares. The pieces, like the bishop, the knight, and the other knight, they control a lot of central squares, especially the dark squares. They're firmly controlled. White really finds it hard to do anything there. And we also have a plan for the light squares. The light squares, as it often happens when you have a bishop that controls the squares of one color, the pawns, they have to compensate for this and control the other color. Yeah, so the dark squares are controlled by the bishop, and the black pawns will help out. So the pawn on e6 will cover the square d5. Maybe I can just remove some of the colors because I think we're getting too many. So now the dark squares are covered by our pieces, and the pawn on e6 will help us fight for the d5 square. a6 will control the b5 square. b5 will control the c4 square. And all these pawn moves, they will work together well with a dark squared bishop. And we, keep control of all the vital squares on the board. Yeah. So this is basically our strategy, and this is also your plan for the next few moves. And once you set up the pawns there, then you can think of what to do next. Maybe you will go for b4, getting the traditional fight on the queen side. White's weaknesses here, they include the knight on c3. Maybe one day we will take it. The pawn on b2. By extension, I mean, that's why the knight cannot really leave, and some squares, right? d4 can be a weak square, potentially c5 can be a weak square. So in general, this position is probably around equal, nicely playable for both players, but we are quite happy with this type of a battle, right? We played the Pirts, we survived the opening, everything is great. We are looking forward to the middle game. So this is a story of the most popular bishop d3. Basically, so just one setup, not very difficult. The other moves, for instance, queen d4, as I said, it's a weird looking move, and I hardly knew about its existence until I was preparing materials for this course. White, well, naturally prevents knight takes e4, but also white is provoking black to take on c5. And in general, we just never want to take on c5. We do not want white to be left with this structure, which after e5 will kill our bishop on g7. This is a common theme, appears every now and then in this opening. The bishop on g7 is strong, unless it's really killed by white's pawns. Yeah? Sometimes these are two pawns on f4 on e5. Sometimes these are three pawns when white also has a pawn on d4. We have to watch out for this, the triangle of pawns limiting our bishop. And here too, we just, in this line, we basically never take on c5 with a pawn. And after queen d4, I suggest we just play the pawn sacrifice with castle. And we also ask white to, show the point behind queen d4. Now, of course, we are threatening knight c6, but we also renewed the possibility of taking knight takes e4 now that this bishop is defended, right? So knight e4 and then bishop c3 is once again an idea. So here, white has two ways to continue. One is the positional bishop d2. Which is the main continuation. And The other one is, the principal, the greedy and the dangerous, c takes d6. So we can start by that, take on d6. And now there is a lot of theory here. A theory, you don't really have to know. It's not our repertoire, just the alternative, but it's very forcing. So we might just as well go through it. Knight takes e4 is very forcing, takes. White's reaction is basically forced. Yeah, this is the idea, the sacrifice. Takes, king f2, queen takes a1, d takes e7, rook e8, and white gets the bishops and some initiative for the exchange, and the pawn on e7 can also be dangerous, of course. Bishop c4, queen f6, and black starts the play against this pawn, and black can also, bring some more pieces to attack the pawn. There is some theory here. I did not want to, just turn it into a theoretical course where we just analyze existing lines, especially, in places where the alternatives exist and we can do something fresher, something newer, something maybe, something more surprising for our opponent. And this is one of the reasons why, after some hesitation, I chose to suggest e takes d6 as a main move. This is a proper pawn sacrifice, but white is not going to have an easy time of it. White king is still on e1, and there are a lot of problems around, the central squares, the hanging pawn on e4, the vulnerable position of the queen on d4. That has a lot of trouble for this pawn. So bishop d2 is more or less necessary. White has to close this diagonal to at least deal with one pin. Knight c6, developing the knight with tempo, is natural and pleasant, right? We do this whenever possible. And now, if white takes on d6, then rook d8 just continues attacking the queen. In fact, it has immediate problems. Yeah? It doesn't have many squares, and the squares it does have are not great. So the best square, it seems, is queen e3, and also the most natural square. Play rook e8. Not immediately threatening, but pressuring the pawn on e4. And okay, now white has a couple of approaches to this position. One of them, the very natural move, bishop d3, is surprisingly some sort of a mistake. But I was, personally, I was not expecting the reason why. When I was analyzing this position, computer disliked bishop d3, and then when I asked why, the answer came in the form of queen d8. And as I said, I did not expect that. And turns out black has a very powerful threat of d5 with dual idea of taking this pawn and playing d4. And turns out white doesn't have a good defense against this, which is somehow strange, right? White is a pawn up and everything seems to be developed, but apparently not all development is good development, right? And turns out white cannot parry threats, and d5 is one. Knight takes e4 is also potentially a threat, and then d5. So this was surprising, but also good to know, because in my opinion, if you get this position and your opponent is not 100% booked up, then bishop d3 is a very likely response, and then you could maybe win a game with queen d8. And And that would be a nice thing. So bishop c4 is better. Knight b4 is one of many possible moves attacking this pawn. Bishop b3 is necessary. You don't want your king on c1 in this type of position. It's just too much. Bishop e6, basically playing against the weakness on c2. The knight appearing on c2 would be problematic for white. White, of course, needs to get out with the king from the center. In a way, it's a bit of a miracle that white somehow makes it out alive in this line. This line is just so dangerous for white. So we take, and now white cannot take with the c pawn, although this would remove the weakness from c2 because knight c2 just wins material. So AB is necessary. And queen c7. So white is still a pawn up, but has a lot of weaknesses. I mean, this is a weakness, and this is a weakness, and black has a lot of normal moves to strengthen the pressure, right? If given time, black could go at some point rook e7, rook e8. This pawn on e4 would be difficult to defend. And also sometimes, once again, d5 again will be an option, right? With knight takes e4. Maybe sometimes we could also defend this knight on b4, which could be very annoying for white. This position was played in some games. I remember a high-level correspondence game that reached this position, and in that game, white played knight b5, and the game quickly ended in a draw after queen d7, and then bishop takes b4, rook e4, followed by queen takes b5, and somehow it looked that white is the only one who could be struggling in this position. So in general, in correspondence chess, it's an open secret that people have access to the chess engines, and they also have a lot of time. So if white didn't find anything better than this line with a draw at the end, then it's some sort of a proof that this line is of very decent quality, right? So this is the story of e takes d6. C takes d6. And the more positional move is bishop d2, or maybe it's not more positional. Maybe it's a wrong description. It's a move that attempts to be positional. Once again, white is asking black to take this pawn on c5, after which white would be very happy, remain with a strong pawn center, then castle long, and everything would be great. And once again, we don't have to take this pawn, right? White lost a lot of time in the opening by placing the queen on d4. And this sort of pawn grabbing is still dangerous, as it always used to be. It still is the case. So we attack the queen. Don't take the pawn, like ever. White needs to keep touch with this pawn. By far the most popular move here is queen c4. And now again, of course, we don't take. We play bishop e6. So basically, we just continue creating threats with every move. And even if you just visually, if you look at this position, it's obvious that black is by far better developed, right? Our king is castled and safe pretty much forever. And all our pieces, like at least all our light minor pieces are developed. The queen is active. So we are like way ahead in development. The white king is still uncastled. And all of this, for a pawn that is not even doing such a fantastic job. So now after bishop e6, okay, knight d5 looks normal. and tempting, but in fact, creating this pin or placing this knight into the pin is not helping white. I mean, the spin is going to be very annoying. We just remove the queen, so put it back. And after castles long, rook c8. This is surprisingly difficult for white to handle. This rook is very strong on the c file. White's pieces are still very clumsy. And black has some unusual threats, like for instance, knight b8 is a threat by bringing the knight to c5. Not only do we get the pawn back, but we also just make it green. But we also create decisive threats because the weaknesses in white's position, they are not running away. So yeah, in general, I'm personally not a fan of pawn grabbing in the opening, and especially when you do it with white and you start suffering on move 11. I sometimes wonder whether a pawn is enough of a price for this suffering, and most of the time I think it's just not. So knight d5 is unusual mistake. Looks so tempting, right? And queen b5 is more consistent. White is basically begging for the queen trade, after which black's dynamic compensation would disappear. So we save the queen, of course. And white will finally castle. And just rook ac8 amongst other moves. And once again, black has fantastic compensation for the pawn with all this development. The queen on b5 is still badly placed, will cost white time. At some point, black will gain more time by playing a6. And the king on c1 will never be safe because black's pieces are placed exactly the way they need to be placed in order to create pressure against the white king. So in general, just white should not be doing this, and with black, knowing this, you have more than enough to make white's life difficult. And yeah, the pawn just ignore this pawn. It will not help white. So this is the story of queen d4. As I promised, this is a move that looks weird in the beginning and doesn't get better as you move on. Now, a couple of moves that are either easily discarded or do not have an independent value. So bishop d2 is one of those easily discardable moves. Of course, it defends the pawn on e4, but after queen takes c5, white doesn't have a good plan, which does not involve bishop e3. So basically, white's in the next couple of moves will likely move this bishop, like queen e2, and try to go bishop e3 in order to be able to castle, right? Because this queen on c5 is so annoying. And this will just mean a lost move compared to the main line or one of the main lines. So white could just get this by playing bishop d3, right? There is no reason for bishop d2, which is why we can just discard it. Another popular move is bishop b5 check, but it basically postpones the decision making rather than solve anything. Bishop d7 takes. Now again, this pawn is hanging, and this pawn is also hanging. And without the light squared bishop, especially the pawn on e4, is very weak in the long term. And by virtue of white giving a check and taking, we basically develop the bishop for free and the knight for free. So bishop b5 is just, it's just not great. Which leaves us with two moves. As I promised you, some of the moves were easy to discard, right? So this is a great thing. Leaves us with queen d3 and queen e2. Queen d3 is a perfectly good move, but as far as I can see, it doesn't have any independent value, because after queen takes c5, bishop e3, it's natural, yeah? White develops the bishop for free. Queen a5, and white now goes queen b5 check, and this leads to the same position as in the main line with queen e2. So these two moves, for our purposes, as far as I can see, are identical. So we don't have to look at both of them in detail. So queen e2, basically just leading to this position that we just had. Yeah, it's important after queen e2 or after queen d3 to remember that we cannot actually take on e4, and not because of queen e4 bishop c3 that would work for us, but because queen b5 check wins the piece. So just be careful. Queen takes c5 is necessary, not knight takes e4. So if maybe here it's more easily visible. So knight takes e4, queen b5 check actually loses this knight on e4, which is not a good thing. Yeah. So we do need to take on c5. Bishop e3, of course. If you can develop the bishop for free, you do it. And then queen a5. So now basically the queen on e2 normally is not well placed, right? Normally, if the queen could not be exchanged right away, we would notice that this queen is blocking the white king side from the development, and it just doesn't make any sense. It just looks awkward. So the only reason this line is so popular and makes sense at all is queen b5 check. The fact that white can just exchange queens, so no more attacks, no more complications, and we have a queenless middle game. After queen takes b5, I think the better move is bishop b5. Knight takes b5 does threaten knight c7, winning the rook, but we can just prevent it. And of course, our a7 pawn is hanging, but so is the e4 pawn. So white doesn't seem to be able to profit from this. I think, a better continuation, a more theoretical continuation is bishop takes b5. And here we can do a lot of things. Yeah, we can go bishop d7, knight bd7, and knight c6. And I hesitated for a while preparing this course as to what to suggest. But finally, I was quite happy with knight c6. Castle's long. It's a very active way to continue. Usually, we don't like the white king on c1, but here it's an ending, and white uses the chance to develop the rook so quickly, and the other rook can go to e1. So this is, in general, a happy place to be for white in the endgame. And now white has a threat of e5, and knight takes e5, based on the fact that black has some problems with the pin. And in general, once again, this bishop on c8 can sometimes be a problem with queens or without. So bishop g4 also here is a very reasonable move, yeah, very reliable. And basically, I don't mind playing some endings where we are forced to take bishop f3, because I think there will be some residual weakness of these pawns, especially the pawn on f4, that we might be able to exploit one day. I don't think the bishops are so valuable in this particular structure, and the weaknesses, the long-term weaknesses, they will not run away. So the only thing that I think visually in this position for me was bothering, looked dangerous, was knight d5. threatening an unpleasant check, until I discovered that we can just take it back. Take an a6. Yeah, this is the well-known mechanism to save the piece from this nasty pin. And now you have probably encountered this particular mechanism many times. If white takes with the bishop on c6, we will be able to win back this pawn on c6. If white takes with the pawn, we'll be able to win back the pawn on b7. So there is no way for white to profit from this spin. If bishop a4, b5 works very nicely. So essentially, tactics just do not work for white, which is why white retreats the bishop to e2, just defending this knight on f3. Sort of white switches from aggressive attempts to make some progress to more defensive measures, defending the knight. And we go knight b8. Amongst other possibilities, this looks like a good square to go to d7, rook c8, and then c5. The knight has a lot of potential on d7. And this ending, basically, at some point, white will go h3, probably immediately. Takes. And now this ending, I expect this ending will be maybe up to a certain amount of debate on the forums and whatnot, because some people will say that white has the pair of bishops and maybe space, and maybe the computer says white is a bit better, but I actually just looked at this position, analyzed it a bit, and I had a feeling after b5, this is in general a useful move, preventing white from going a4 and laying a claim, so to speak, at the queen side. I think black actually has very good practical chances. This bishop is strong. The knight is coming to c5. And we could also go rook b8 and knight to b6. And in general, I see a lot of long-term ways that this could go. This could turn into black's favor. This pawn on b2 is a weakness in the long term. And if white plays c3, then both these pawns will become vulnerable in the long term. And essentially, I just do not really value the bishop so highly in this type of a position that is so closed. Similar endings, I think, are known in the Sicilian Dragon, but I have a feeling this one, is a better version. So yeah, in general, I think the plans now. You have seen also various endings in the periods elsewhere in this course. I think black has nothing to fear, and yeah, this is of course just a personal opinion. I have a feeling that this ending is easier to play with the black pieces, and I hope I will. I hope I'll be right about that. Yeah, so looking forward to seeing more games from this line by you guys. So now let's do a small recap of this journey we had through this line. So this was this ending that we got after white went queen b5 check in the queen e2 line. And this whole line took place, starting from here. So maybe we can do some recap of this and also of the line in general. So now, bishop d3 was white's the most natural, the main move, leading to a very positional sort of game where maybe forgetting a move will not hurt you too much. So in general, just very sort of sort of a position where the common sense moves, they work out well. There were weird lines like Queen d4, where white actually runs into trouble potentially if black knows what they're doing, and I think we do. Bishop d2 was well, rubbish, frankly. Bishop b5 was not better. And there was this ending after queen d3 or queen e2. So in fact, for all the number of moves that white has, the overall amount of knowledge which is required from us is quite concise, and comes down to a couple of positions which are very reasonable for us and a couple of positions which are actually dangerous for white to play. So, and to do sort of a larger recap, this was the position after c5, the sort of the very heart of the Austrian attack, where we looked at e5, which was premature. We looked at d5, which was frankly promising for black. And we looked at dc5, queen a5, which, you know, we just now had in some detail. All of this leaves us with the very main line of the Austrian attack, and potentially the very main line of the entire opening, possibly. This bishop b5 check in this position. And this is a big topic which deserves its own specific chapter.